Unless you've been living on a rock, you probably already know how crazy the housing market is, and this isn't necessarily another scare video about the next housing market crash or anything like that. What I want is to give advice and tips to people that want their offer to kind of be more competitive compared to other people's offer. The reality is a lot of us don't have an unlimited supply of funds, so just having that slight competitive edge on doing whatever you can, whatever it takes to make your offer that just that little bit more likely to be accepted can go a huge ways. I also want to go over some of the inherent risks on trying to make your offer more competitive that some people may not have even thought about. For example, some people out there, if they can, they try to forego having an inspection because they're trying to kind of sweeten the pot for the seller's perspective, that the seller doesn't necessarily have to worry about the inspection, what's going to come up during the inspection. But have you thought through what the risks are involved with that? Are you actually willing to pay thousands of dollars for having to replace the furnace and AC? Is that something you're willing to take on? Maybe you're just that desperate that you're just kind of forgetting the actual inherent risks involved. Or it's becoming more and more common, especially in this current housing market, is people are buying homes completely sight unseen, or at the very least, they're only able to tour the home after they already put earnest money down and they're actually having the final inspection, or they're having an inspector come in and do a home inspection. That's the only time they're actually able to kind of get into that home and tour the home in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And the reality is what happens is that people get frustrated that offer after offer gets rejected, and so they get to this point where they're just kind of desperate and will do anything to be able to get their offer accepted. But what you have to understand is that in your best financial long-term interest? It's extremely risky to buy a home completely sight unseen. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from this video, regardless of the tips on how to give a competitive offer, it's to just be patient. That's going to save you the most amount of money. For example, if I can forego buying a home for a year or even 3 years, that can end up having huge implications. Versus, I understand some people are in kind of inconvenient living situations and they're just desperate to move into a different home. But the reality is, if you're going to pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 over asking price, what does that mean for your long-term financial situation? You're basically trading off this short-term suffering of living in a small, tight apartment versus the long-term suffering of having to pay 60, 70, 100 extra dollars per month on your mortgage that you wouldn't have had to do had you just waited a couple of years longer. So let's get into some tips on how to make your offer more competitive. And if you appreciate having actual financial advice and real steps versus there's other channels out there or even other websites out there that just give vague general financial advice, save more, spend less. What does that actually do for you? If you appreciate getting real financial advice and real specific topics, feel free to comment down below financial topics you're interested in. Even if it's very specific, I'm willing to do a video on it. All I ask in return is just consider subscribing to the channel and give this video a big thumbs up. I'll cover the more obvious tips like offering more money later on in this video, but I want to start with the ones that don't necessarily come inherently to mind. For example, making your offer as simple and as clean as possible. I'll talk about what that means in a second, but just think about it this way. If I were to offer, the generic population out there, 2 different burgers, one burger that had a whole bunch of unique ingredients, sure, they're unique, but they're kind of complicated, no one necessarily knows what it is, versus a very simple plain burger, American cheese, beef patty, ketchup, and mustard. That burger, even though it's more basic and simple, is going to be a lot more popular to the generic population because the reality is people like simple. The same is absolutely true when it comes to a home offer. If I offer you $200,000 in cash, I'm giving it to you tomorrow, there's no strings attached to it, that's a much more appealing offer than a $210,000 offer, but it's contingent on the inspection, and if something comes up during the inspection, I may end up trying to renegotiate. The closing date is about 2 months out. It may have to be delayed because I have to sell my other home. These are things and variables that make it really hard to evaluate that offer, especially when you have 2 different offers that are like that. What is more appealing? A $210,000 offer, the closing date is 60 days away, but they aren't required to have a home inspection, versus an offer where they are required to have a home inspection, but it's a 215, probably by now you're already like, I don't even know what he's saying. I'm already confused. That's exactly my point, right? You want a clean and more simple offer. So think about what are things I can do to make my offer as simple as possible. Obviously, the most ideal scenario would be that you can make an all cash offer, but even if you have to get banks involved, there's still ways to make it more appealing to the seller. For example, let's say you're required to have a home inspection. You can spell out for the seller, hey, during the home inspection process, I'm not necessarily going to try to renegotiate for anything. If the AC is broken or if the furnace is really old, I'm not trying to renegotiate. I'll eat that cost and pay for it myself. That will make it a lot more appealing to sellers because that's the main reason why they don't necessarily want to have the home inspection process, right? They're worried that something's going to come up, they're going to have to renegotiate, and they've already rejected these other offers. And so then when you're trying to renegotiate, they're going to reject your offer and have to go back to these other offers. So that's why home inspections aren't really that appealing to sellers. But if you kind of spell out for them, hey, I'm not going to try to renegotiate during the home inspection process, well, the offer I made is the offer I made, that can actually make you have that slight edge over other people. Now, obviously, I feel the need to spell this out for people, but obviously there's an inherent risk involved with doing that, right? You're laying a lot on the table there, because let's say something does come out during the home inspection process where they say, well, the foundation is completely ruined. Well, depending on how you made the offer, you're still on the hook for that, or you're on the hook to lose your earnest money. And so, there's obviously inherent risk involved with that, but if the whole goal is to make your offer as competitive as possible, then that certainly is an option. The next tip is, when it comes to making your offer, you want to be as fast as lightning, which is about 300,000 miles per hour, in case you were wondering. But anyways, it's not enough to be pre-approved anymore. That really is pretty much meaningless when it comes to the seller. You need to be the first to make the offer, and in the most ideal situation, you want to be making an offer on a home that's not even on the market yet. Or at the very least, you want to have completed a tour or have a good understanding of what a home has to offer before it actually gets listed. And this may mean getting a little bit creative. If you see somebody out there having a lot of garage sales, or perhaps they have a moving pod or even a moving truck outside on their driveway, that's a good indication that they're getting ready to move. So if you see the seller or the owner of the home, you can ask them up and say, are you planning on selling this home? Can I get a tour? Or can I at least have a ballpark range on what the idea would be for its listing price? That can give you a slight competitive edge. So that way, once it does actually hit the market, you can actually make an offer right away, because you've already toured the home, you have a good understanding of the home, and other people are having to set up appointments to come tour the home, and they haven't even done that yet, because let's say it gets listed on day one, even if they call that exact same day, they're probably not available to tour the home that day. So if you can have that competitive edge and give a slight competitive offer, that may give you the upper hand. Now, in some circumstances, it actually makes sense to give a competitive offer before it actually hits the market and not necessarily have to worry about competing offers. But especially in this climate, I would actually suggest possibly waiting until the home is actually fully listed. Because if you give a competitive offer before the home actually hits the market, what the seller is going to do, especially if they're a smart seller in today's climate, they already know that they have all the leverage. So if you're offering $20,000 on their list price before they actually officially listed it, they're just going to increase the list price before they actually go to list it. And on top of that, they're using your offer as kind of a leverage tool to kind of get more competing offers from other people. Anybody that's touring that home on that first day, they're going to establish, hey, well, just so you know, there's already an offer out here that's $20,000 above asking price. So it's not really benefiting you in any way. So it actually may make more sense to wait, once that home actually gets listed, to actually make the offer on the first or second day, even though you've already toured the home before the home had hit the market. Obviously, this is kind of a risk reward type scenario, because you run the risk of waiting a little bit too long and the house is off the market. And the same is kind of the other way too. If you could, in theory, in some cases, make such a competitive offer before the home even hits the market that some people are like, whoa, this is way more money than I was expecting. I'm willing to accept it and not even have to deal with listing it. That could work out, but it could also, hurt you in the long run, which all of this kind of ties into my next tip on how to make a competitive offer. Making sure you understand what is actually motivating the seller. Are they moving across states? Are they just upgrading to a different home? Are they having to move in a circumstance which requires them to sell this home quickly? Are they desperate to get this home sold? Are they trying to buy a home that's contingent on them selling this home? So finding out the motivation for the seller can actually be key, because perhaps they're not too concerned about the closing date. All they're really worried about is the price. Maybe it's the other way. Maybe they're really concerned about the closing date because they have to get another home lined up, and get the timing perfectly, because they don't necessarily want funds tied up into two different homes. So if that's the case, the closing date is more important. Maybe there's a little bit more wiggle room on the price. Now, last of the more unique tips before moving into the more obvious ones is to consider going into a housing market that is a little bit less competitive. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say you work in downtown. The neighborhood you're looking at is about an hour commute, and it's just such in high demand that's not really worth justifying the cost. So perhaps can you move out to a 2-hour commute and then end up working at a place that has kind of a hybrid type model where you're only going into the office 2 days out of the week? Or same thing with school districts. Perhaps you're trying to look into a neighborhood that is in high demand because of its good school districts. In some cases, you can actually live in a different school district and actually end up getting approved to take your kid to this other school district ended up driving there, as long as you end up dropping them off yourself, that may be a certain situation. So there's ways to kind of get around these. Sure, they're not necessarily perfectly convenient, but there are ways to kind of end up branching out into different neighborhoods that perhaps aren't necessarily as ideal because of their commute time, their conveniences, or whatever it may be, that you actually may be willing to kind of work around because of the price. These next 3 tips when it comes to getting your offer accepted are going to be ones that I consider kind of playing all your cards and putting it out on the table. The first being obviously giving more money. A significant amount more money will, greatly increase your odds of getting your offer accepted. But obviously you want to be a little bit strategic here, because if you offer $10,000 above listing price, that gives the opportunity, a little bit of room for somebody to come in and offer $15,000 over listing price or $20,000 over listing price. But on the other hand, if you offer $50,000 off of the listing price, maybe you ended up overpaying. Perhaps you could have just offered $30,000 and still got your offer accepted. So you kind of want to be strategic here, because it does benefit you to offer a huge significant amount. The way I kind of look at it is, let's say you're trying to get, a new job and you're trying to get paid a little bit more. Let's say you're getting paid $50,000 right now. You get a call up from a potential employer that offers $100,000 to starting. That's way more than you would have expected. You're probably expecting somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $70,000. So this employer that's offering $100,000, you just immediately accept that offer because you're just that excited. That's way more than you thought, and you don't want to even risk the potential, opportunity getting passed up. So that's why you ended up accepting that amount, even though perhaps you could have found a different employer that would have paid $120,000. The same is true when it comes to buying a house. If you end up having a huge offer on the table that's way more, and they're just kind of blown away by that offer, they're going to accept it right away. The next potential step you could take to kind of sweeten that offer is to have an escalation clause built into your offer. So the idea here being that if there's a home that's being listed at $200,000, I come in at $225,000, but in my offer, I built in this contingency clause, this escalation clause, that if somebody ends up offering more than my bid, I'm willing to either meet it or exceed it up to a certain amount. And you can even write that into the offer up to, let's say, $250,000. Obviously, you're kind of playing all your cards here, because now the seller knows you're willing to go up to $250,000. So why wouldn't they hold out? But the way I kind of view it is, it could still potentially work out to your benefit. If I'm willing to, just at the very beginning, offer $250,000 versus me offering $225,000 with an escalation clause up to $250,000, it could only be to my benefit, right? There's a potential chance that the seller doesn't take me up to that offer, to that $250,000. Versus if I offer $250,000 to begin with, then they either accept it or they don't. So either way, I'm paying $250,000. At least with the escalation clause, there's a potential that it won't be actually to that $250,000. The last potential step you could take, which I don't necessarily recommend, is basically do things that are a little bit financially compromising, but get the offer accepted in any way possible. So that may mean putting a bigger amount of earnest money down versus, just putting a couple $1,000s. Perhaps you put $10,000 or $20,000 down as earnest money to show to the seller that you're a very serious buyer. On top of that, you could do things like, I mentioned earlier that if you can do an all cash offer, that makes it more simplistic for the seller to kind of accept that offer. Are there things you can do from moving from a traditional mortgage or even a FHA loan or whatever type of loan you're planning on using? Are there things you can kind of do that really aren't really the best financial practices, but allow you to give an all cash offer? For example, perhaps you put other things up for collateral rather than have the home up for collateral, and kind of secure that funding in a different way. Perhaps that means, working with a family member or friend even to kind of get that, those funds secured. Like I said, not necessarily something I would recommend, but I wanted to include in this video as an option, because the reality is these things would actually help significantly to kind of sweeten that offer and make sure that you get it accepted. That's it for the major steps that you can take to kind of sweeten that offer. At the end of the day, there are these kind of miscellaneous ones that really don't move the needle that much in terms of the likelihood of your offer getting accepted. But at the end of the day, they don't necessarily hurt you either. For example, you could write a letter to the seller kind of pleading your case, or you can even offer, to let them sell all the appliances, right? They can sell that refrigerator, the stovetop, whatever it ends up being, because those are things you can just buy yourself, especially because you can buy those, on layaway or credit card or whatever you end up wanting to do. Anything you can do to kind of sweeten that pot and kind of move that needle just slightly in your favor in terms of getting that offer accepted. But the reality is most of these don't really end up having that major of an impact. Like I said, it really is key in understanding why the seller is motivated, what's motivating them to sell, and kind kind of targeting that. That's going to be your biggest return on your time. Because going back to that whole idea of like writing a letter, that ends up having a significant amount of time writing that letter, only to have that needle move just barely. So it's not really worth your time. Try to focus on the things that are going to move the needle the most, because that's going to be your biggest return. Because at the end of the day, your time is valuable, and already buying a home is a time intensive process. So you want to make sure you're using your time as best as possible. So that's it for this video. Like I said earlier, if you appreciate videos, personal finance videos or real estate videos that really get down into the details on how to do certain things, really actually specific advice versus just generic advice, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a big thumbs up. And like I said earlier, feel free to comment down below on topics that you want to hear more about. Even if it's very specific, those are the things that help people the most when it comes to, actually saving money and personal finance. So like I said, please subscribe to the channel. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one.